In this video, we'll focus on some advanced pronoun grammar that can be tricky, but that native speakers use all the time. After leaving the amusement park, Joel tries to rush past the shepherd and the sheep. He has big plans for shopping in the marketplace today in the plaza, and he doesn't want to be distracted. The shepherd can tell that Joel's in a hurry. "What's your rush?" he asks. Joel angrily responds, "I have plans today, big important plans. What would you know about it, sitting here all day with your sheep?" In Joel's estimation, this shepherd is a small-minded person. He and his sheep seem just to stay in one place all day, doing nothing interesting except dancing once in a while. Meanwhile, Joel and his friends, the pandas, have all kinds of adventures throughout Joel. Remember that in this scene, Joel has names for each of the characters. The shepherd is tú. The main female sheep is ella. The main male sheep is él. And Joel is yo. And then Joel uses the word nosotros when he's talking about himself and the pandas. So that's the word for we. But when Joel is addressing the shepherd and his sheep, if he's speaking to them as a group, he calls them by a word whose stressed syllable is ste. So ustedes is the word. This is the plural form of you, as in you all. For Joel, the word ustedes means all of you people who stay here all the time. Joel contrasts the boring ustedes with the more exciting nosotros, Joel and the pandas. He says things like, "We, nosotros, have adventures, but you all, ustedes, just stay here doing nothing." The shepherd is a little offended by this. He says, "I respectfully disagree. We have adventures too, you know." "Like what?" asks Joel. "Well, for one thing, all the sheep know how to dance," says the shepherd. He whistles, and suddenly all the sheep are dancing. "Hey-ya! Look, see, all of them can dance." He points at the female sheep. "Ellas can all dance." Then he points at the male sheep. "Ellos can dance too." Joel rolls his eyes. "So what if some boring sheep can dance? I bet any old sheep can do that. That's not special at all." Pulling out his spray paint, Joel paints the word unas on one fence and unos on the other. These words are a lot like una and un, but they apply to more than one sheep. For example, if a sheep is masculine, a sheep would be un sheep, but some sheep would be unos sheep. Joel uses these words when he's emphasizing sheep or any other objects that aren't considered special. For the nerds, these words, unos and unas, are called plural indefinite articles. As the shepherd looks around at all the art painted on his fences, Joel says, "Bye now. Nosotros are leaving ustedes alone. We have more important things to do than sit around staring at unas dancing sheep." Before we leave this scene, I want to point out that the word ustedes confuses a lot of English speakers. In English, we just use the word you, whether we're talking to one person or several people. But for Joel, they're completely different things. Tú is used when there's just one person, but ustedes is used when there are more than one. This is something we'll get used to with some phrase practice. So here's a phrase that we can use. You all do very strange things. Ustedes do cosas muy strange. Remember that ustedes is a subject pronoun. Another new subject pronoun that we've learned is ellos, for they, in a masculine sense. They have very nice things would be ellos tienen cosas muy buenas. Now here's an example of one of our new articles, one of our plural indefinite articles. At the house of some friends. So if this were singular, it would be at the house of a friend or at the house of un friend. But since it's plural, we turn a into some in English. And in Spanish, that's turning un into unos. So, at the house of some friends would be en la casa de unos amigos.
En la casa de unos amigos.
Now let's use the feminine version of that in a different example. First, I need to have some things. So this would be, antes tengo que tener unas cosas. Now the words ellos and ellas, just like él and ella, are used both as subject pronouns here in the sheep pastures and as prepositional pronouns where Joel sits in the tree dreaming back in Lesson 5. So these words can be used after prepositions like para or sin. For example, the hardest thing for me is not to worry would be lo más difficult para mí es no to worry. But we could also say the hardest thing for them is not to worry, or lo más difficult para ellos es no to worry. This applies to ustedes as well. It doesn't change between this scene and the prepositional pronoun scene. So, the hardest thing for you all is not to worry. Lo más difficult para ustedes es no to worry. Today, Joel rushes through the next few scenes very quickly, so it's hard for us to say exactly what he does in each place. Instead, let's talk about these three areas in a more general way. So these three areas that Joel normally visits are the direct object hill, the indirect object crossroads scene, and the reflexive stream. In all three of these scenes, the words that we store are used right before a verb. For example, I have it is lo tengo. That's from the direct object scene. I'm giving her a book is le, I'm giving a book. And that's from the indirect object scene. And then I'm seating myself is me, I'm seating, from the reflexive scene. Each of these areas seems to store very similar items. The words me, te, and nos are in all three scenes, though they mean different things in each scene. But the word lo, stored in the direct object scene, transforms to le in the indirect object scene for the sheep that lay down. And it turns into se at the reflexive scene. And the word la goes through the same changes. It's le as an indirect object and se as a reflexive object. As you noticed in the sheep pasture scene today, the words una and ella can be made plural when you put an s at the end, unas and ellas. Similarly, the words un and el were turned into unos and ellos. This rule of making words plural will work for some of our object pronouns as well. For example, let's try it at the direct object scene. If I have one house, I can say I have it by saying la tengo. But what if I have more than one house? To say I have them, I say las tengo. So the words la and lo at the direct object scene can turn into las and los. But be careful. As always, it's very important to recognize that these two words are completely different from the words las and los that we learned as articles in the sheep scene. Those words mean the, whereas these words mean them. So los hombres, for example, means the men, and that would be from the sheep pasture scene. But los tengo means I have them, so that's a direct object. If you know how to use lo, la, me, and te from the direct object scene, then you also know how to use los and las as direct objects. For example, I saw them could be las I saw or los I saw. Here's a sentence example. I saw them many times. Las I saw muchas veces. Another example. I'm reading them again and again. Los I'm reading una y otra vez. Now, how about the indirect objects in the next scene? If we're talking about more than one person, I can do something very similar with the word le. Normally, I use le when one person receives something. For example, I'm giving him some books would be le, I'm giving some books. But what if I want to say, I'm giving them some books? That would be les, I'm giving some books. The word se, meanwhile, doesn't change when there's more than one person. To say she sees herself, you say se she sees. And if there's more than one person, it's just se they see. In other words, se can be either singular or plural depending on the context. But let's stay at the indirect object scene for a bit. Some really strange things often happen when Joel uses le. Consider this sentence. He asked her if she had something. So this is pretty straightforward. Le, he asked, si tenía algo. The person being asked is her, represented by the word le. It literally means to her. Now, what if we wanted to clarify who that person is? For example, he asked his mother if she had something. In that case, his mother is the indirect object. We might be tempted to phrase the sentence like this. He asked a su mother si tenía algo. So his mother would be the indirect object in that case. But Spanish speakers actually don't say it this way. They do something a bit stranger. The sentence would sound like this. Le, he asked a su mother si tenía algo. Wait a minute, what's the point of that le at the beginning? It looks like to her, he asked to his mother if she had something. That's really weird. Yeah, it is redundant, but unfortunately this is one of the awkward rules in Spanish. If an indirect object is involved, we almost always put the indirect pronoun at the beginning, even if the indirect object is also named afterwards. So we have the le at the beginning, and then the a su mother in the middle there. Now, personally, I endearingly call this the ridiculous redundant indirect object. Let's practice with some examples, just so we can get used to this. I told my father that I was here. We have to say, to him I told to my father that I was here, or le, I told a mi father que estaba aquí. I told my friends that they were very nice. That would be les, I told a mis friends que eran muy buenos. He asked his friend if he had something. Le, he asked a su friend si tenía algo. We're not quite done. There's another complicated thing that happens with indirect objects. Something particularly strange happens when Joel uses more than one object pronoun. When would that ever be an issue? Well, let's actually just use a simple English example. I gave it to you. Our two pronouns here are it and you. So the it is the direct object, which is what I'm giving to the recipient, and the recipient is you. Normally in English, we say, I gave it to you, but there's actually another way to say that sentence in English, although it's not quite as common. It would be, I gave you it. So think about that for a bit. I gave you it. This sentence structure is extremely valuable to us because it provides a glimpse into Joel's mind. As you can tell here, I gave you it. The recipient, you, comes before the object, it. In fact, if we replace the word you with any other recipient, the structure will stay the same. We could say, I gave them it, or I gave her it. In each of these cases, there are only two words other than I gave at the beginning, and the recipient always comes before the direct object, it. For Joel, this is extremely important. When he uses words from more than one object scene, for example, both an indirect object and a direct object, he always goes backwards. moving back from the crossroads toward the scene with the hill and the tree. So going back to our sentence, I gave you it. Here's how Joel would say it. Te lo, I gave. The word te is an indirect object in this example. It's from the crossroads scene. And lo is from the direct object scene. Joel was going backwards on his path, moving toward the hill instead of going toward home. Here are some more sentences that use that same structure. They gave me it would be me lo they gave. They gave us her would be nos la they gave. Are you ready for it to get worse? Let's imagine that Joel wants to say, I gave her it. So if you've been following this whole thing, then you should come up with le lo I gave. To her it I gave. Again, we're moving backwards from indirect to direct. Le lo. However, Joel really doesn't like the sound of that sentence. The words le lo together sound like singing to him because of the L sound used more than once. And Joel personally hates the sound of someone saying la la la, le lo, le la. So anytime Joel would say le lo or le la or anything like that, Joel stubbornly mispronounces it on purpose. He changes the word le to se. For example, I gave him it would be se lo I gave. This seems really bizarre, but in these cases, the word that looks like se and sounds like se is actually the word le, but it's disguised. It looks and sounds like se because of Joel's strange pronunciation habits. It might help to think about it this way. The sheep that lay down, le, is also sometimes called se, but that only happens when Joel is moving backwards toward a direct object. Again, this is very complicated and it's best to learn with a few sentence examples. So let's practice this a little bit. In each case, imagine yourself moving backwards from the crossroads scene to the direct object scene. But every time you would say le lo or le la, you're going to change it to se lo or se la. Our first example is, they'll give it to me. So this should be, they'll give me it, or actually, me it they'll give. So, me is the indirect object, and then lo is the direct object. Me lo, they'll give. How about, I'll tell him it? That would be, le lo I'll tell. But since it's le lo, we have to spell and pronounce it as se lo. So I'll tell him it is se lo I'll tell. How about we'll tell it to you? So to you is the indirect object, and that has to come first. Te. So we'll tell it to you is te lo, we'll tell. How about they'll give it to him? That would be to him it they'll give. Le lo they'll give. But we have to change it to se lo they'll give. We'll tell it to her. Again, that would be le lo we'll tell, but we have to change it to se lo we'll tell, so that we don't annoy Joel with the le lo. While we're in the country, let's review two more scenes really quickly. First, we'll go to the lake. We've previously learned esta, esto, and este to mean this. And we've learned esa, eso, and ese to mean that. For the nerds, these lake pronouns are called demonstrative pronouns because they involve virtually pointing your finger, demonstrating what you're talking about. This or that. As a mnemonic for the word demonstrative, it kind of has a stress on monster, demonstrative. So think of the Loch Ness Monster, which might be living in the lake. Now, these words, esto, esta, eso, and so on, have plural versions as well. This can turn into these when you put an S at the ends of the words. So, esta means this, feminine, but estas means these, feminine. Also, estos means these, either masculine or neuter. For some reason, estes isn't a thing. It's always estos. Now, it's the same thing with turning that, or eso, into those, or esos. You can turn esa into esas, and then both eso and ese turn into esos. Here's a sentence example. All those things at once? Todas esas cosas a la vez?
¿Todas esas cosas a la vez?
How about another example? All these years at home? Todos estos años en casa? When Joel goes to the woods today, he and the pandas begin to feel hungry. He looks inside the barrel that he's holding and he sees that it still has some oats in it. He tosses a few of these dry oats into his mouth. The pandas ask, "Can we have some of those oats too?" But Joel responds, "No, the barrel is mine." To say this, he says, "The barrel is mío." The word mío means mine. It's similar to mi, which we also learned here, but it's used when it's not followed by a noun, just like the difference between my and mine in English. It's my barrel would be es mi barrel, but it's mine would be es mío. The pandas argue with Joel. "But you said that the oats were for all of us. Can't you share our oats?" Joel doesn't like to share. Why should he waste the oats on the pandas when he can have them all to himself? He tells the pandas, "They're not our oats. That would be a waste. They're my oats." As he says this, he accidentally spills some of the oats on the forest floor, effectively wasting them so that nobody can use them. The word our in Spanish, as in our oats, is nuestro. So it starts with an N, but it has a stress on waste. Nuestro. Let's quickly review what we've learned in this scene. Before a noun, you can use mi, tú, su, or nuestro. But when Joel says, "It's mine," he uses a special word, mío. This word changes to mía when the noun is feminine. There are a couple of related words. Tuyo is based on tú, so this one means yours rather than your. For example, if Joel wanted to say, "The house is yours," he could say, "La casa es tuya." Similarly, the word su changes to suyo or suya. The house is theirs would be La casa es suya. Now, Joel really likes to emphasize his own things so much that he likes to put the word the in front of mío or mía sometimes. So sometimes he says el mío or la mía. This also applies to the words tuyo and suyo. Let's use an example. Yours has very nice things. That would be el tuyo tiene cosas muy buenas. Theirs has very nice things. La suya tiene cosas muy buenas. And then mine did very mean things. That would be el mío did cosas muy mean. Before going on, make sure you can list all of the pronouns you've learned according to location, and also get some practice with the ridiculous redundant indirect object, as well as the se lo phenomenon.